Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me again on this. What you know of the treaty, does it go far enough to satisfy the Supreme Court?
Well, I think what's important for your viewers to understand is that the Supreme Court is not for or against the Rwanda plan. And that's really fundamental to our constitution, because immediately when they said that the last iteration, the last version didn't work, they received criticism for something they hadn't done, and they received a lot of praise for something they hadn't done. And it's really important that we all draw back and understand what our courts are doing. All they're doing is administering the law properly and making sure that any scheme fits pre-existing law. Parliament has the power to change any pre-existing law, so any scheme is possible, and we don't really have public law in this country. We have what's called administrative law, and everybody needs to go back to that. Public law is the idea that courts and government are oppositional, that they're fighting, and that's not right. That's not what ours are doing. Our courts are not fighting the government, and so what has happened now is I'll bore your viewers a bit. We had a memorandum of understanding, which is weak in international law. It's not binding even in international law, and we had an addendum to that. We now have a treaty, which is roughly twice as many words, and they've clearly got their heads screwed on, and they're doing what you would do, any of us would do. They've gone through each of the criticisms by the Supreme Court, and they've tried to address them. And what they will now do, I hope there'll be a second part to this. So we've beefed up the memorandum of understanding. We've made it a binding treaty in international law, but the most important law is always our domestic law. And I hope and trust that there will be some changes in our domestic law to absolutely see this through, so that if it does end up in front of the Supreme Court, again, because of the people who are very animated about this, the Supreme Court will be able to say, no, this time they've got everything right. And to be perfectly honest, Jacob, this task could have been started in April last year. You know, we could have been hotter on this. I mean, I'm not criticising or taking any political stance on it, but I've just noticed that we have now changed tempo in how we are approaching this. We are now approaching this properly, with our heads screwed on, with good law and a proper understanding of what's going on. It's a sea change really in the last week. And I think that needs noting. Whether you like it or not depends on whether or not you like the Rwanda plan. So again, that's not for me. But it does seem that there's been at least a sea change.
I do get your point that the court is not there to say whether it likes the Rwanda plan or not. But didn't it seem a bit odd to you that the court decided to prefer the evidence of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees rather than the British government?
Yes, you have gone laser-like to the one weakness in the Supreme Court position, and it was in the Court of Appeal. And I think we as a nation are going to, and this actually isn't really connected with Rwanda at all, because the most pressing evidence of this is what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. But there are very serious questions about the UN, about its probity, about its veracity, whether it is actually saying things upon which we can rely. I mean, there were really serious questions about what's happening with the UN, and the one oddity, the one striking oddity of the Supreme Court judgment was how it just simply trusted, if a UN agency says it, I trust that. Well, that's not how I was trained to deal with evidence. I find it surprising in such an eminent a court, and I'm sad to say that they may well find themselves with egg on their face, because the UN may very soon prove deeply untrustworthy. I mean, there are allegations it hid an Israeli hostage. I mean, there's nothing lower than that.
No, indeed. Well, look, thank you very much, Stephen. It's such a pleasure to have you on to cut through these knotty issues, which my panel, Jerry Hayes and Michael Crick, will continue to cut through.